Any questions before we continue? I think we'll continue with the I, okay? Yes? Continue with the I? Okay. All right. So we first level of dependent arising, remember, is that things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. So the crucial piece to remember here, the context, the framework here we're discussing is the two truths. The reason to look into why things are dependent arisings isn't just to be clever. You know, it's to prove that they're empty. It's the king of logics to prove. The trouble is right now, Buddha says, because we have this ignorance, this ego grasping, this marimpa, it has multitudes of consequences. So one of these instinctive consequences is that as soon as we hear reality, which is the two truths, as soon as we hear the word emptiness, everything, and Buddha would say the correct view is, this is correct words, that from the side of the object, the person, the cup, there is nothing that makes it that thing. Hearing that, those words are accurate, okay, according to the Prasangika Madhyamika view. There are various views in Buddha's teachings taught at different levels about how things exist, you know. But this is the one that is the actual intent of the Buddha. It's the middle way view, or the one known as the consequentialist, or the Prasangika, the way our lamas teach. So the words are that from the side of the object, upon analysis, which is what one has to do, using the dependent arising logic, there is nothing that makes it that. It's one way of saying it. So the second we hear some statement like that, we can't help but hear, oh, so there is no self, so there is no cup, so there is no this or that. So the Buddha says that instinctively we hear this, that's the nihilistic view, and that's an extreme view. That's not the correct view. And our mind runs to that immediately. And as we say in English, which is a great statement, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do you have something like that in Finnish? Yes. It's a great statement. It's you throw away too much. And we hear that. We hear it. We can't help but hear that. We feel it this way. And even many people who are Buddhist even, when we hear emptiness, we go, well, it's all empty, it doesn't matter anyway. That is a statement of nihilism. That's a completely incorrect statement, a completely incorrect understanding. That's what our mind does immediately. So then as soon as we hear the dependent arising, that there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon causes, conditions, etc., instantaneously we hear that wrongly as well. And what we do here is we put too much upon it. We reify it. We grasp at it and go, oh, thank God there's a cup after all, you know. So these are the two extremes that our mind runs between. So philosophically speaking, this philosophy of reification, that's the philosophy that is expressed as the creative religions. They exactly are stating that there is an entity that is inherent, that is independent, that is permanent, that is uncaused, that has always been, that doesn't change from moment to moment, and that's called God. Well, Buddha, this is where his argument is. He's not arguing with the concept of superior being. He states it also. He's not arguing with omniscience or infinite compassion. He states that. He calls it enlightened mind. But he disagrees with the interpretation of it that reifies it and sees it as independent and inherent and having no cause. And that's the way the creative religions talk about God, or indeed about the soul. And that's the exact argument that Buddha's having with the Hindus, and they use the word Atma, or self. So they did an amazing amount of work of looking into the nature of self, you know, coming up with these extraordinary views of this concentration meditation, but they still reify something, and Buddha diverged from that point, because they still would assert the concept of a source that's the source of everything, called God, whatever they call. It's maybe a more subtle view, because they also assert karma, which the Christians don't do, sort of do. But they certainly have the view of the self, which is just the same as the soul in the Christian teaching. So it's a philosophical viewpoint, Buddha's saying. And he disagrees with it. That's why he diverged into his own direction. And then he got into the Buddhist views. There are various Buddhist views presented in the Buddhist tenets, in the text that one study that are in fact the teachings of the Buddha, but there are ever more subtle as we move through those schools of thought that all lead, he says, the teachings say, the lamas say, to this one called the Prasangika Madhyamika view, the view that finally says that there's nothing from the side of the object that would make it what it is. But the point is, it is not saying there is no self, there is no I, there is no cup. That there's a dependent arising cup. So there's levels of dependent arising. We've just touched upon the first one. But as Lama Zopa says, when we've really understood emptiness, the actual meaning of emptiness, he said, it is as if there is no I, no cup, no this, no that. But there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it is as if it is an illusion. It is as if it is does not exist. So it's an incredibly fine point, and one that's extremely hard to hear. That, in other words, what Buddha's actual intent is, and Lama Tsongkhapa really runs with this one in great depth, is that when we hear that something is a dependent arising, and we've only discussed the first level, we'll go to the second and the third in a minute, that as soon as we hear that there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon this and that, rather than the instinctive impression to reify it and hold on to it, we immediately would say to ourselves, aha, ROBINA, that means it is completely empty of existing from its own side. And then as soon as we hear that about emptiness, but from the side of the object there is nothing that makes it what it is, that there is no inherent I, no inherent cup, instead of instantly becoming nihilistic and chucking the baby out with the bathwater, we say to ourselves, that means it is a dependent arising. Because in reality, dependent arising and emptiness point to the same thing. They're like flip side of the one coin. And it's really powerful practice for us when we understand the words of even these teachings, but to bring them together in this way. And the real middle way is in between these two, is the bringing together, of these two. Because finally they're not contradictory. Whereas now they're miles apart, you know. We're like drunken sailors going between these two all the time. And we can look, even, this is me sort of extrapolating here, we can look in our own life. That the emotional kind of experience of the nihilistic one, that's depression and despair. That's why we kill ourselves, isn't it? Life is worthless. That's nihilistic. And look at the emotional component of it. Now look at the emotional component of the reification one. Everything's gorgeous and perfect, you're in love and it's divine and perfect and it's lasting forever, and finally I've found happiness. That's the reification one. And this is like attachment and aversion. We go between these all the time. They have these components, you know. This feeling of these two mistaken views. They're kind of embedded in them. Can you hear what I'm saying? No? Yes? Okay. So now let's go to the second, the real tasty level of dependent arising in order to look for, which is what Buddha says we must do, this fantasy self that we think exists, but which doesn't. And that is, excuse me, I have to have a big blow. I'm so sorry. So let's use the object called I. But let's really get this clear as well, because the commonest one we think is, but there's no I. So how can we say there's an I, you know? So keep remembering the two truths. You first have to establish something as existing conventionally before you describe its ultimate nature. It says in the Heart Sutra, okay? Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness. Emptiness is nothing other than form. What this means is that you can't have the emptiness of inherent existence of something without there being a something. Okay. There does exist the absence of green, does there not? Okay, can we, in general, can we discuss in general the concept of absence of green? We can do absence of red. We can do that, can't we? Absence of green, okay? We can discuss it because we understand the meaning of words. We can discuss absence of green somewhere, can't we? You agree? Now, if you want a direct experience of the absence of green, what would you have to have in front of you?
Green.
Huh?
Green.
No, the absence of green. You'd have to have, using our example, you'd have to have a thing that is not green in front of you, wouldn't you? So that means you'd have a red cup, for example. So where does the absence of green exist?
Well, it exists
On this red cup. So absence of green, the emptiness of green isn't just some, oh, there's no green in the kind of general. Do you understand? Nothing. Absence of green is a vivid thing that exists on a red cup. Do you agree? So you can't have emptiness of green without there being something that exists, can you? Because emptiness of green is the characteristic of something that exists. Can you hear that? Okay. So use the same logic and you use the concept of an eye. So can we agree conventionally this room is full of a bunch of phenomena called selves? Yeah? Chairs, and there's microphones, and there's cushions, and there's people. You agree? So people, person, I, self, being, they're all synonymous. They refer to a type of phenomenon that is a piece of flesh which is conjoined with a mind. Yeah? That'll do, isn't it? And we're human examples of them. So we are persons. We are selves. We are I's. Can you accept that? Conventionally, conventionally, conventionally. We agree? We agree. Now let's describe, let's discuss, let's analyse how the I exists. It's the same discussion as how the cup exists. There's no difference. In some of the earlier Buddhist schools, there is a difference. But in the Prasangika Madhyamika, the same characteristics apply to all phenomena, selves and things. Okay, so what Buddha's saying, if we look into the second level of dependent arising, that I is established or exists in dependence upon lots of bits and pieces, parts. So if you think of anything in the universe, a microphone, a cushion, a person, a tissue, it's made of bits and pieces, isn't it? It's made of many parts. Would you agree with that? Everything we can think of. And even a thought is made of many parts, this moment of the thought and that moment of the thought. They're all parts, aren't they? So you have a phenomenon that is a bunch of parts. You agree? Everything is existing independent upon its bits and pieces. Yeah? You agree? So a person is made up of bits and pieces. Now, the Buddha wrote a text, one of his sutras, is he described us in terms of being divided into the 5 aggregates. It's just this seemingly initially arbitrary grouping of 5. It could be 50, it could be 2, you know. But he's chosen a particular way of breaking down the components of a person. So if you're going to read the 5 aggregates, the first one, called form, is merely referring to the physical. That's all. Matter. Matter. The second and the third are 2 of the 51 mental factors that I mentioned before in this text that you study, the model of the mind in Buddhism, the psychological model of the mind. And these 2 he plucks out in particular because of their really powerful role that they have in our daily life in relation to how, especially how attachment works. The first one is called feeling, and the next one is called discrimination. They're 2 as a grouping called the 5 always present mental factors. And these are happening every millisecond of your experience, every sentient being. Feeling in particular is super powerful when it comes to understanding how attachment functions and why we suffer. So it doesn't relate to emptiness here, but I'll go into it anyway. And then we can go back to the emptiness one. So, okay, feeling, the way we use it in our world, it's like synonymous with an emotion, you know. That's not the meaning here. In Buddhist psychology, you've got 3 feelings. Every millisecond of the day, based upon this type of body we have, we're going to have either a pleasant feeling, which is called happiness. We all know you can have blissful levels of it to the most mild levels of it, a pleasant feeling. We've got unpleasant feelings, which is called suffering, to the most intense level to the most mild. And then you have this other lot called neutral feelings, and don't worry about them. But we can see very obviously, isn't it, having this junky body of ours, that the attachment, the mind that runs this body of 5 senses, is craving every millisecond for a good feeling. That's what it wants. That's what it wants. It's a junkie for good feelings, basically. It only wants what it wants, which is a good feeling. You with me? Clear. So attachment runs us, default mode, every millisecond, this craving to get a good feeling. So that's why the fisherman, the poor fisherman, with an imprint to kill from the past, he meets the scenario called fishing, the attachment makes it look delicious. He runs like a magnet to it. Whatever looks delicious, you know, it triggers, this is the tragedy, the attachment triggers a very, in his case, very powerful, pleasant feeling. So logically, because we're junkies for good feelings, the deduction will be, well, fishing must be good. It made me feel good. That's why he keeps fishing. That's why torturers keep torturing. That's why pedophiles keep jumping on little girls. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why it's so, you know, we'd have such compassion for sentient beings when you understand this. Instead of just criticism, you know. We have compassion for ourselves. We are junkies for good feelings every millisecond. Attachment, the part of us, is junkie for good feelings. Now, a good feeling is not attachment. A good feeling is called happiness. And as Lama Yeshe puts it, please, the more happiness, the better. We're allowed to have pleasure, happiness, joy, good feelings. They're all synonymous. Nothing wrong with happiness. Our problem, Buddha says, is the only way we know how to trigger a good feeling is by getting an object of attachment. Think about it. Whereas Buddha's view is amazing. Buddha's saying that our mind has the natural capacity for incredible good feelings, for incredible joy and bliss, naturally. And we get that when we've removed the delusions from the mind. This is why Buddha is saying very simply, you know, that we think happiness is good feelings. Nothing wrong with good feelings. It's our right to have pleasure. It's our right to have joy. Buddha's saying it's our natural state when the mind is completely purified. Please hear me. So, right now, so what we're saying, the junkie world, the samsara, is basically the assumption we live by is that happiness, good feelings, are what we get when attachment gets what it wants. Look at our life. The nice smell, the nice taste, the weather pleasant, the cool air when you're too hot, the warm air when you're too cold, you know, the comfortable bed to turn over when you're unhappy on this side, the pleasant husband, to the ugly husband, change the handbag, change the food. Do you understand my point? All the time, desperately, we are attachment, that part of us, is desperate, hungry, like a vampire, to get the nice things. And that's the logic of samsara. The assumption of samsara is, living in this body, is that good feelings are what arise when attachment gets what it wants. This is samsara, Buddha says. Whereas he says, so simple but so outrageous, that, I'm sorry guys, you got it wrong. Happiness is what you get permanently, unchangingly, forever, eternally, naturally, completely, when you've given up attachment. So depressing. So, for example, I mean, this is a simple point that Buddha's making. It's not some cosmic religious idea of happiness. Don't hear it in a fantasy way. This is psychological. For example, I always quote this. My friend, one of our monk friends, Renee, Venerable Renee, who's Swiss, lived for years in the States, and lives in retreat, been a professional retreater, meditator for like 30 plus years, you know. And I interviewed him back in 95 after one of his 18-month retreats at our place called Urselling in Spain, near Granada. Maybe you've been there, where Lama Ursel, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, was born, in a place of clear light, named by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 82. And it's a retreat centre. It's a marvellous place. His Holiness said it reminded him of Tibet, you know, lovely little caves up there, and it's very beautiful. And Renee did an 18-month retreat there, and I interviewed him about his retreat, and it was a single point of concentration retreat. So as you know, as I mentioned, this system of single point of concentration was the Hindus created, that enables you to get to the subtler levels of your own mind. We need to go there eventually to realise emptiness. We can't do it with a gross level. That it's described in terms of 9 stages of subtlety, development. So he said maybe in that 18 months, he maybe touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages. And he said something like this, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, Robina, the joy, the bliss I experienced in his own mind, in meditation, in his own mind, the bliss I experienced was infinitely superior to any bliss or joy I had ever experienced through the medium of my senses. So the point that I'm trying to make here is the simple bare bones fact of the mind, Buddha says, is when it's unencumbered, even temporarily, by the junky delusions, by the craving and the grasping and the neurosis and the fear and the misery and all the rubbish that runs our lives, even just temporarily unencumbered by that junk, the mind is naturally blissful. The mind is naturally happy. It's a natural state of mind. Whereas when we hear these words, we're thinking of pleasure as some kind of result of something naughty, you know, practically. And we think of happiness as some reward you get, because we think of it in dualistic terms. But for Buddha, it's a natural law. It's the nature of a mind. That when it's fully developed, it is naturally pure, naturally clear, naturally blissful, naturally wise, naturally loving, when the delusions have gone completely. This is Buddha's deal, you know. So good feelings, nothing wrong. Don't think good feelings or pleasure or happiness are somehow necessarily a product of attachment. Therefore, they've got to be given up. One of our commonest things when we think of attachment, we think of the pleasure that attachment objects that trigger, and we assume they mean the same thing. They don't. Pleasure is the natural ability of a mind to have good feelings. But our trouble is the only way we know how to trigger them is by getting an attachment object. That's our problem. So we need to be super clear about the difference. But it's very hard when you've got even a simple piece of chocolate cake there. The attachment in the mind is this running, rampant, berserk junkie in there, completely on autopilot, hungry and needy and grasping and manipulating and exaggerating and clinging and shoving in the mouth, waiting for the pleasure to come, thinking the cake will bring the pleasure. But like I said, we don't know, and the pleasure is true. There is some pleasure triggered. You can't say there's not. But what the Buddha's saying is that attachment pollutes the pleasure. It drags it down, and it makes the mind extremely dull and therefore harmful. So we can't conceive of pleasure, joy, pure joy of the mind itself. This is inconceivable to us. We have no... Occasionally we would feel things, joyful state of mind. We might wake up one day feeling light and joyful. We can see. And it's almost like some gift from somewhere. No real cause, we don't know why, we don't know how long it's going to last, it could be for a moment. But this is the point. Buddha says we can be in control of all this, you know. So why Buddha plucks out feeling as one of these 5 aggregates is for this reason, because it's such a huge one. And because we believe it's the fruit of getting what attachment wants. So it's a massively important one to understand, this one called feeling, pleasant or unpleasant. So then, the other one is called discrimination, which is the ability, like I mentioned before, an intelligence in us that is functioning all the time, that enables us to make any decisions at all, that enables us to distinguish, bare bones, distinguish between anything, this and that. And when it comes to attachment and the way we live samsara, it plays a major role in causing us problems. Equally, when we're trying to purify ourselves, it plays the major role in trying to change, you know. So he plucks out these 2 from the 51 and gives them this status as 2 important components of a person, just because of their role in the way our lives, you know. So it's form, feeling, discrimination. Then the next one is like this grab bag of leftover bits, the remaining 49 of the 51 mental factors, and other bits and pieces that are impermanent, but are not mind and are not matter. Like karmic imprints are said not to be matter or mind. Time, all sorts of other bits and pieces that make up a person, like a grab bag of leftover bits, impermanent bits. And the 5th one is the one's mental and sensory consciousness in general. That's how they talk, the 5 aggregates. So we can say we're made up of 5 pieces. But for the sake of this discussion, looking for the self among the parts, we can talk about 2 parts, body and mind. We can talk about 1,000,000 parts, all the bits and pieces of your joints and your blood and your cells and your toes and your eyelashes. You've got millions of parts. We can see this, can't we? So the general idea of looking at the dependent arising of the self, of the I, in relation to parts, the crucial point here is that Buddha's saying this ego grasping believes there is a part called self, as one of my friends said, walking hand in hand with the other parts. You can say it like that. And our language expresses this. I have a nose. There's an assumption that you'll find a nose and you'll find the owner walking next to the nose, kind of overseeing it, like the landlord. You can say it like this: the feeling we have when we analyse, and Buddha says we have to do this analysis, and people study this stuff for 30 years and then go meditate and do the analysis for another 30 for the penny to drop. The assumption is that there is an I in there somewhere among the parts, either separate from or one of the parts. And there's an absolute conviction. And the Buddha says the total belief in that is the cause of all pain, all suffering, all delusions, all attachment, all neurosis, all lower realms, all upper realms. And until we've cut the belief in that, which is the realization of emptiness, we'll never end suffering, you know. And it's the hardest one to see because it's so primordial, so profoundly instinctive, so ancient habit. There's a million ways we have to do the analysis, you know. I know that the book you've been studying of Geshe Graham is a really nice book about dependent relation. This is exactly this topic. Tsongkhapa's text. Very nice one. So the key thing is to understand what Buddha's saying. He's saying you won't find a piece in there called I, which doesn't mean there is no I, and that's the part that's tricky. That's the part that's tricky. So all the Buddhist schools, up to the Prasangika, would all agree on certain things, that there's no inherent I, but they would say there is a part in there, there is part of the aggregates, usually a part of the mind, that can be stated as the basis of that label I. There can be the thing that is pointed to. So they would all say there is no self-existent I, but there is something in the aggregates that does exist. There has to be something, they say. It's only the final school, the one that is said to be the real intent of the Buddha, that says that from the side of the parts, which is the basis, you've got to look in the parts, not in the sky somewhere. If the I existed, it's going to exist in the parts. If the I existed, it's going to be in these parts, nowhere else, not in this curtain, not in the window, not in the toilet. Because I is here. This is an I conventionally. So we're going to look for the inherent I. The I, inherent means an I that is independent of anything. When you understand inherent means that, it's simple. Because we know there is nothing in the universe that we can think about, even general terms, that doesn't exist in dependence upon something. Inherent, which is what the ignorance thinks is there, can't exist, Buddha says, because it would mean, inherent means not dependent on anything. Independent. So Buddha says you won't find such an I among the parts. That's where you've got to look. Well, it sounds so peculiar to us to think this way. Because look, like I said, look at our language. It completely reinforces the lie. When we say I, especially when we're injured and hurt and offended, there's a feeling so total that there is a special little piece in there that's called I, that is feeling angry, feeling jealous, feeling depressed, feeling happy, feeling insulted, feeling lonely. It's so real for us. It's so vivid and totally true for us. We always act as if there is a real pointable I in there. All attachment, aversion, jealousy are all assumptions, are all responses of the assumption of the presence of that I. Everything we do and say and think are the product of the belief in that I. So accidentally all the Buddhist schools, up to the final one, all say there's got to be something. Each throws away a little bit more and gets to the point where even there's got to be some. So this view, the Prasangika Madhyamika view, is like outrageous, radical, scary as hell, you know, to say there's nothing in the parts that can be pointed to as an I doesn't mean there's no I. So it's a bit like, that's why you've got to have the two truths. You've got to have the two truths. Because as the way they say it, when you finally realized that among the parts you will not find one atom of a thing called an I, then they say you realize what's called subtle dependent arising. That because you won't find an I in there because I is merely labelled. I is merely labelled. That's actually the conclusion after you realise emptiness. Merely labelled. The subtlest level dependent arising, which is the one that's unique to the Prasangika Madhyamika view. Because all the other schools say there's no self, there's no inherent I, but there's something in the aggregates that is that does exist, that is inherent. Whereas this view says there's nothing even in the aggregates that's inherent, even the basis. So it's a question of getting our head around, even conceptually, these ideas, you know. So when we hear that from the side of the parts, which is where you have to look, there cannot be even an atom that is the independent I, but the merely labelled I, so that I is the name we give by the mind imputed upon those parts. So from the perspective of there being no I, you can say there is no I among the parts. So then we go, oh, well, there are parts, that's okay. No, because now you analyse the parts. Ni is a name. You won't find a ni among its parts because ni is merely labelled. Ni is a name imputed by the mind upon its parts, the joints, the ligaments. So we'll go, oh, thank God there are joints and ligaments. No. From the perspective now of the parts, there is no ligament among the parts. Ligament is a label imputed by the mind upon its parts. So all the time it's like this smoke and mirrors. There's nothing from its own side, but there are the parts. But as soon as you then analyse the parts, there's nothing there either. But the point is, there is an I called ROBINA sitting on this chair that does function, that fits the definition of ROBINA. There is a cup that fits the definition that does hold my water. So there is a cup, but nothing from its own side. These two appear contradictory, but they are totally saying the same thing. And the more we can bring these two together, the more close we are to Buddha's view. Are we communicating here? Any questions, please, people? Any questions, you think? I mean, this is just a summary, you know? No thoughts arise? There's so many arguments we have to do. You look in the other book. I know that the other excellent book I really, really, really recommend, and I wish you'd get books. I've been telling Mika we've got to start a shop here. Why give Amazon all your business when the centre can have the business? You know, somebody's good at business. Talk to Miko, and you can start a business here and have a shop. Yes. He's too scared to say no. But you've got to have, all you people need books. You'd probably go straight to Amazon because they're cheaper, right? Why not bring the profit to the centre? Isn't it? Oh, he doesn't believe me. Luca does. Anyway, never mind. Another really excellent book is one that's called Insight into Emptiness, and it's published by Wisdom. And it's beautiful teachings. It's by my philosophy teacher, actually, Geshe Tekchok, who was the resident Geshe at our monastery in France for 10 years, Nalanda. He passed away this year. And he taught it at Landa Medicine Buddha in California to Westerners. So he sort of took from his own experience all the years the way of presenting it, a very the approach to emptiness, these different arguments we're discussing, but taught in a nice coherent way, especially for Westerners. So it's a really beautiful book, Insight into Emptiness. That one and the Geshe Graham book are two really good ones to understand dependent arising. They're great. So, okay, so then one of the there's all these little exercises you can do, logics you can use for the mind, because this is the crucial point to understand here. Okay, one point in particular to understand. That one way I like to say it this way. When we understand that, use the two truths as our framework. That we think about realizing emptiness. We think about meditating on emptiness. We get all confused, like emptiness. What does it mean? Meditate on emptiness, emptiness, emptiness. There's no I, there's no I. We don't quite know what it means to even meditate on emptiness, because we're confused about the word meditate, for a start. And I'll discuss this. But the crucial way, these relationship of these two truths, and then when you understand, okay, I have to talk a bit to the two types of meditation. This will help you understand. The two types of meditation, there's millions of techniques of meditation, but there's two main ways of using your mind in meditation. And it's so interesting when you hear the Tibetan word for the verb to meditate. It really grounds us in understanding this approach. Because if we look at the word now, meditate, everyone's got their own idea. And one of the commonest ideas is somehow stopping all the thoughts, So there are two modes of meditation. And the first one, which is called the end result when you've got it, is single-pointed concentration. And that technique, indeed, coming from the Hindus, and it's a crucial one, is the one that the job is to learn to be focused. And one can get to this really subtle focus, way beyond the gross level, like I'm talking, levels of mind that we don't even posit as existing in our culture. So the job there, for sure, is to not be involved in the conceptual thought. The job is to completely cease to the subtlest level, the dualistic nonsense, And it's a really intense technique. And that's called single-pointed concentration. So that's just the beginning. It's got a phenomenal results and byproducts for a person who's accomplished it. And the Hindus, that was their end result. But Buddha says it's just the beginning. With that super focused, laser-like, subtle level of cognition, one then is now completely qualified to then do the second mode of meditation. And the goal of this is to get insight. Well, the general word here is vipassana. So there are many kinds of vipassana meditations, but the one that's virtually known as vipassana is the one where I've never done it, where you focus on different sensations of the body. And it's all one of Buddha's techniques. It's fantastic. But the one that's taught in the Mahayana is the one that's called special insight. Special insight. And that is insight into emptiness. And the method you use to access, to trigger that insight is, they call it in Tibetan, analytical meditation. Now let's look at the word meditation. It's the verb to familiarize. And so the first mode is just a preparation. You get your mind focused like a laser. Now you use that laser light, that laser powerful focused mind to do the real job of familiarizing your mind with two things, with that which is virtuous and that which is true. This is the point. The first one is just the beginning, just getting your mind ready to do the real job of familiarizing your mind with truth and virtue. Because right now, our minds are totally, spontaneously familiar with nonsense and with non-virtue. That's called samsara. So the verb to meditate means to familiarize. And so you ask to familiarize your mind with what? Virtue and reality. That's it. So that's what's done in the second mode. And so the point is this. The goal is to trigger an insight. And again, in English, this is a great word. I notice in other languages, these weird translations that make it sound like religion. But insight, you got a good word in Finnish for insight? No? What do you say for insight? Do you use the word in daily language? When you sort of, I got an insight into something. You don't use that word? You don't have that word in Finnish. Is that insight? Translate it literally. Translate it literally. Huh?
And it's like, inside.
It's like, if you're thinking something through and you go, I get it. Insight means that in English. I get it. What's the word? Is there a good word in Italian for that? No? When you're thinking something through and you get it, like you worked out your sums, you did something and you suddenly understand the meaning. That's simple. It's got, you get it. I understand it now. That's called an insight in English. It's a very good, ordinary word. It's not religious in its nature at all. Can you hear what I'm saying here? Yeah. Insight. It's a very simple word. When you work something out and now you understand it. That's a great word, insight. But they use it here, but often it's seen as a religious term. But it's not. Don't fantasize it, please. It's wrong. It means the penny drops. You get it, you know. Well, what the insight is what the result is. So you think about this. If you have to, you know, I always use the example of learning mathematics from my teacher when I first went to school. And she taught me that 1 + 1 is 2. Now, I'd never heard that before, right? So she told me to go home and do my homework, didn't she? And what she wanted me to do was to get an insight into 1 + 1 is 2. She wanted me to understand the answer. She wanted me to put it together and work it out, didn't she? That's what homework is, isn't it? You with me, people? Mm-hmm. Now, this is what the 2 kinds of meditation are. So she would, if she'd been a Buddhist, she would have said, Robina, go home, get some single-pointed concentration, do your best, focus. And now when you've got some focus, go to the second mode of meditation, and I want you to think through what I've just given you. I want you to do some analytical meditation. Well, that's a fancy word for the verb to think. Okay? It means to think. Don't think it doesn't. When we hear, oh, analytical meditation, what's that? It's just nonsense. It's called thinking. Don't think it's not. Please. We spend our lives doing it. You understand? Yes. So she would say, go home and get some focus, Robina, close your door and get your desk. And then I'd have, and the crucial point is this, what would I think about? In order to get the answer, number 2, what would I have to think about? What were the thoughts I'd have to do? Please, come on. What did she just teach me?
How it comes up to 2.
What?
How it comes up to
But what did she teach me?
1 + 1.
Thank you. I'd have to have the information, wouldn't I? I'd have to have the correct information. Wouldn't I have to have that? I'd have to have 1. I have to know what plus means. I have to know what equal means. In other words, I'd have to have my correct thoughts. I'd have to have the words right. I'd have to have the definitions right, wouldn't I? If I kept thinking well, maybe she said 1 + 1 is 3. I'll never get the answer for a million years. So you've got to have the right words, don't you? And in the beginning, the words have no meaning, do they? It's like with your music or the cooking. The words have to be correct, but you initially don't understand them. But that's what you have to think about. And then one moment, then eventually, after a while, I have my pencil, I take my blocks, and at some point, I'm doing my thinking, and I'll go, oh, Mummy, I get it. Well, that's an insight, people. And that's how you get enlightened. You use your noggin, your brain, you get the information, emptiness, karma, impermanence, compassion, you name it. You take the information, you get some focus, you go and meditate on it, you think it through, and that will trigger an insight. And then the more you get concentration, the more you hear from the teachings, the more you think about it, the deeper the insight, the deeper the insight, the deeper the concentration, the deeper the insight, until eventually you get your first direct, non-conceptual, genuine, experiential insight into the truth of emptiness, karma, and everything else. That's what's called realizations. Can you hear me, people? It is nothing cosmic. It's how we've learned everything we have ever learned. But because these words are religious and Buddhist, we put in the sky, you know. Are we communicating?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's nothing different from what we've learned, ever. How you've learned music, computers, science, maths, language, everything is this process. You hear the words, you get them right, you have some focus, you familiarise your mind with it, and then one day the penny drops, and then you practice it to perfection. Well, that's how you become a Buddha. And I am not joking. It just takes longer, that's all. Because the mistakes are deeper in the mind. So, you take your information to the extent that you've learned it. It might just be 1 + 1 is 2, that's it. Or it could be 27 years of maths, whatever you've learned. And you build on it. Same here with your teachings. Same here. You take your teachings on, depending on arising on this, on that. You've studied it, you've debated it, you've learned it, you've memorized it, you know the words. If you don't know the words, how can you think about it? How can you think about it if you don't know the words? You've got to think. You just don't go, there's no I, and hope something works. You know, there's no I, empty, empty. This is insane to think like this. You've got to have the words. So your meditation consists of some focus, and then to the extent that you have any words available to you, even you've got a book in front of you, and you read a few words, and then you stop, you close your eyes, and you try to taste it. You think it through. And then as the more you think it through, the more you speak about it, the more you debate on it, the more you analyse it, the more you have to think about, and the stronger your concentration, the deeper the insight becomes. This is how you get these realizations, like piano, violin, cooking, and everything else. That's what you have to study. Think it through. Use the words. Discuss it. Be accurate. Be confident. Otherwise, it's just confusion in your mind. The penny will never drop. The insights will never come if you haven't got the right words. Because the words are the substance of your analytical meditation. And that's what triggers the insight. So the insight, in other words, okay, so here, using the two truths, the substance of your thinking is the dependent arising arguments in your meditation. And what that triggers is the insight. Aha, therefore, there can be no I from its own side. Like that, you know, and that gets deeper and deeper, more and more profound, more and more true. But there's a million arguments, you know, a million debates to use, a million ways of approaching it. One has to learn these by studying, you know. So the feeling we have, isn't it? Well, you see, when one of the crucial things the Buddha is saying is that a thought, this is one way of saying, in our mind now, in our mental consciousness, in our conceptual level of mental consciousness, which is our day-to-day thinking, as I said before, the mind has got these millions of different thoughts in there. Positive ones, negative ones, neutral ones. Well, forget the neutral, they're all the technical ones that help us function better. But the positive and the negative are the crucial ones we have to understand. So the key factor about the negative ones is that they're liars. Meaning that thought of attachment, which is clinging to a certain object, the object that attachment believes exists doesn't. So it's a liar. Therefore, some thoughts in our mind are valid, meaning they are in sync with reality to some extent. The negative ones are not in sync with reality. So a simple lie in the mind is easy, isn't it? A simple lie would be that I've got 2 cups in my hand. A simple lie. That's easy. That's a straightforward lie. But it gets more difficult when it's like that we all agree there's 1 cup. But we're not realizing that, for example, the delusion called attachment is decorating on top of this cup some delicious qualities that the cup doesn't possess. It's an exaggeration of my mind. So in that simple sense, attachment is a liar. It believes there's a delicious cup there, meaning as if there's red, there's a dragon, and there's a bit of deliciousness painted on it as well. We believe that deliciousness is a quality inherent in the cup. We believe it totally. Well, in that sense, it's a lie. The cup is there. It is a cup. You know that much. It does hold your tea. You haven't got it totally wrong. But we're not realizing the delusions are, as Lama Zopa says, decorating on top of what is there, layers of characteristics that aren't there. So the deeper lie, of course, which underpins all the others, is that the ego grasping, the ignorance, believes there's a self-existently, there's an inherently existent delicious cup. Meaning having nothing to do with my mind. That it's out there from its own side, inherent, independent. So we hear this, but it's a struggle to see that this is what we're doing spontaneously all the time. So we've got some level of truth. It's not as if there's no cup there. It's not as if when you realise emptiness, the cup disappears. That's ridiculous. The person who realises emptiness will see the same cup as you and me. Red cup with dragon, you know. But they will know it's not self-existent. They will know the mind is creating, you know. It's a way of saying it. So basically, in the mind, these delusions, they are thoughts. They are thoughts. There are 2 cups in my hand is a thought. It's got the same status as the thought. There is 1 cup in my hand. And what Buddha's saying is the negative states of mind, they're thoughts, they're real thoughts, but they don't have a basis in reality. They don't have a basis in reality. And that's what we have to discover. And once we discover the truth, that there's 1 cup, the thought, there are 2 cups, disappears into a puff of smoke. Gone for eternity. That's how you become Buddha. That's how you become enlightened. By removing from your mind the lies. And that's what Buddha says. All these lies are adventitious. They don't belong. They're not at the core of our being. They can be removed. So when we understand all these lies, which have this massive emotional component, have this conceptual component, what they are at their bare bones is concepts, elaborations, exaggerations, distorted interpretations of something, then we can understand how you can become a Buddha. Because a Buddha's mind has rid their mind of all the lies. They've rid the mind of the lies. And because they're concepts, they can be removed. That proves Buddhahood. So to see the lies, that's what's difficult. Because these lies are so ingrained. The particular lie called ignorance, utterly, primordially, utterly, completely pervasive, has been there for eons, and it pervades everything. Everything appears to us like that. Everything seems to be this. We totally buy into it being this. And we don't even know the words for it because it's so primordial. That's why it takes time. So one of the biggest things we have to do is try to become familiar with what we think the I would be, the wrong I, if it did exist. We have to get a very vivid sense of this. Because right now, when we hear that Buddha tells us there is no inherent I, who cares? We're not the slightest bit interested. We have no idea what he's talking about. Well, who cares? Who says there is? So it's sort of like you're so convinced it's green. When he says that it's not green, you don't know what he's talking about because you're just so convinced it's green. You've never heard of red. So you've got to first know what it would. You've got to first know how the mistake is. There's no point in trying to think about how there's no inherent I if you can't imagine what an inherent I is. It's ridiculous. You can't possibly do it. If you don't know what 10,000 euros is, how can you look in the bank? You've got to know what it is first to see if it's not there. You've got to know what an inherent I would be if it existed, and that takes time. So to even understand that inherent would mean independent, has to be something independent, pointable, findable, throw everything else and it's left. So one of the exercises they'd say to do is, that if there is an I in there, an independent, inherent I, an I that doesn't exist independent about anything else, it will be findable. It would be there. Like you say, I've got a knee. Well, where's your knee? Well, it won't take long. You'll find your knee. Because we all agree there's a thing called a knee. There it is. Point, knee. Not your hand, not your finger, not your toe, your knee. So if there's a self, you've got to point it out, Buddha says. Come on, okay, prove it. We get annoyed with him, Well, here I am. No, precisely where? Because you say, one argument, they say the owner, the possessor, can't be the possessed. So the one side will go, well, I'm all of me. This is me here. So we say, I have a nose. Well, good, there's my nose. Well, if you've got a nose, there has to be a possessor of the nose. Who owns the nose? And which part of you is the owner that isn't the nose? For example, too many things on my table. My table, I don't know, let's say, never mind. We'll do this. And I will do that. I'll drop everything. My chair, okay, look here. Would you agree? My chair has a cup and a lid. Oh, getting too complicated. And a biscuit. Okay. Here, look. There we go. All right? I'm making a statement, a conventional statement. Can you please verify that I'm speaking the truth? My chair So when I say the words, when the words my chair emanate from this mouth here, you look over here, don't you? Because you know the definition of my, don't you? And you know the definition of a chair, right? So my chair has a biscuit, a lid, and a cup. I'll have a look quickly. Would you agree with this statement? So we have to prove this really properly. They talk about there's one and there's many. So we've got every individual thing is there's an individual phenomenon. So if we say my chair has a cup, a biscuit, and a lid, we have to prove it's true, which very simply means I have to point out a biscuit that is not the lid, that is not the chair, and is not the cup. Do you accept that? There's a biscuit, okay? And we have to point out a lid that is not the chair, that is not the cup, and is not the biscuit. There it is. And we have to point out a cup that is not the biscuit, that is not the lid, and is not the chair. And we have to point out a chair that is not the biscuit, the lid, or the cup. Do you accept that logic? Yes. So we can now prove that conventionally I made a true statement that can be proven conventionally, yeah? Okay. Well, I have a nose, a hand, and an eye, and a foot. A nose, a hand, and a foot. Do you accept this? Yes. Okay, let's prove it. Prove it. Same. Prove it. Conventionally. Prove it. Conventionally. Conventionally. Prove it. I have a nose, a hand, and a foot. Well, there's my foot. Cut it off. Put it there. There. There's my hand. There's my nose. And now point out the phenomenon, the individual, separate, one phenomenon called an eye that is not the nose, that is not the foot, that is not the hand. Buddha says, really simply, if even conventionally it is true, you will find it. And it won't take long because there's only so many parts here. So which bit, where is the eye that is not the nose, the hand, and the foot, and indeed everything else? It's very infuriating, isn't it? This is the type of analysis we have to do. But it's still it's confusing us when we hear it, because we so assume the presence somewhere of an eye that's independent, that has feelings, that gets upset, that is tired, that is fat, that is ugly, that is depressed, that is miserable, that is special, that gets lonely, that is this, that is that we're preoccupied with day and night. And Buddha says it's a story our mind has made up. Maybe that'll do for today. What do you think? Go home, do some thinking, do your homework. Any questions before we go home?
Yes.
Oh. Where? Yes, darling.
So if we compare becoming enlightened to learning that 1 + 1 is 2, then so when we learn that 1 + 1 is 2, or how to play the piano, or how to bake a cake, well, the teacher may be present, maybe not present.
Teacher first, always. Then eventually you learn it yourself. You can internalize it, can't you?
Yes, but it doesn't matter if we like the teacher or if we hate the guts of our math teacher. It'd still be 1 + 1.
I know, but it helps having a teacher you like, doesn't it? Come on, what's the point, though? What's your point?
So what is the role in becoming enlightened then? Because it's so much emphasized. So
Darling? What?
So when we speak of becoming enlightened...
Yeah, what's enlightened mean for you? Have you heard? Did I mention it briefly? What do you... Okay, so you mean why get enlightened?
No.
Oh, what's the point then?
What is the role of the teacher?
Oh, the teacher.
So
The same. Good God. Hey. Have you learned anything in your life that you didn't learn from another human being? Is there anything you've ever learned that you didn't first get from another human being who knew how to do it?
No, but I mean not the presence of the teacher, but the attitude.
Okay,
I don't have any personal attitude to the person who wrote some recipes.
so I don't understand your question. Are you asking the bare bones question, why do I need a teacher?
No.
What are you asking then?
Why do we cultivate the attitude?
What attitude? What attitude? You seem to be a lot of assumptions in your question, but you aren't stating. So I need to hear your assumptions.
So
what do you think the role of a teacher is? What do you think is the relationship? You're assuming, but I can't hear what you're saying.
For example, seeing the teacher as the Buddha.
Okay, thank you. Now you're speaking. So speak out what you understand the relationship to a teacher is, and then I'll understand your question better. Speak it out, what you understand.
So why do we need to see the teacher as the Buddha?
Uh-huh.
If we compare these two things, to understand this sort of informational thing.
Okay, I understand. Did you ever have teachers whom you liked, whom you felt close to?
Sure.
Okay. Do you think having that closeness in your heart and feeling more open to them enabled you to learn it more easily?
Perhaps.
Only perhaps. Only
It also
perhaps.
depends on the subject.
Pardon?
It also depends on the subject.
Right. But in general, would you agree that we're human beings? It's a simple answer, okay? That we are human beings. We have a heart. And if we have a really good teacher and we like that teacher and respect that teacher, that means every word they say, there'll be no resistance. If you hate your teacher, you'll be resisting the whole time. You still might be motivated to go do your math, but there'll be a lot of negativity in your mind. You'll be very objecting, you'll complain, you'll moan about them, and you'll just hold yourself back. But surely if you can see just emotionally for you, having an open heart, revering this person, respecting this person, honouring this person, wanting their feedback, wanting to please them, we're human beings, I would suggest you'd learn more quickly. Don't you think? That's why you should see the Buddha, the teacher as a Buddha. Because our mind right now is full of delusions, attachment, aversion, and we're dumping those delusions onto everybody who's in front of us, which is what blocks us from even hearing the truth. Because the truth we're talking about here is emptiness, finally. So when your mind is, the simplest way, when your mind is more open and more sweet and more devoted and feeling more pure, then every word you hear will go in 1,000,000 times more quickly, and you'll get the realization of no self much more quickly. It's practical in the most simple way. It sounds so complex when we say see them as a Buddha, you know.
So it's actually kind of a psychological.
Of course it is.
That we, like,
Sweetheart, it's the most profound one. It's actually the one of Guru devotion is really seeing emptiness. Because the delusions right now, our delusions see this any person out there through the filter of our delusions. So even if we think they're fantastic, that's another delusion called attachment. And then as soon as our teacher looks at the other girl more than me, we get upset. So we're always seeing everybody through the filter of our delusions. Whereas if I try to have pure view, which you've got to cultivate, that this person is an enlightened being, then I train my mind to think this. And I do my visualization meditations, as you know, it's in the practices. When you really develop something quite profound in your own mind that triggers it's just a technique for you. They could be dead, you know. Lama Yeshe's dead. But my job is to see him as a Buddha. It's a practical tool for my mind to break down delusions. So breaking down delusions is the job. So I get more realizations more quickly. Does it make sense? Yeah. It's a practical thing. But when you read the texts, it's like medieval kind of hell realm. It's like medieval fundamentalists. These Tibetans are more fundamentalist than any fundamentalist you could read if you read the way they talk. I couldn't even speak about Guru devotion the way they talk about it, you know. For me, I try to make it more just tasty and see the logical benefit of it. We're all human. We've got a human heart. We're all Lama Yeshe says, we're dying to be loved. We're dying to love. Well, at least choose a person who's worthy of your heart. You understand? And the key one too, because with mathematics there's one thing, like you said, you can still learn your maths. But here we're talking about changing my mind. So if my mind is delusions, they're my problem, but I'm seeing my teacher through the filter of my delusions, there's no benefit. Because I can't hear his advice. So for me, from the day one, from my teacher Lama Yeshe, my first one, basically, you request the person to be your teacher. You know, Lama Yeshe was my Lama. Okay. So then the real work started, because his job is not to teach me mathematics. It's to show me my mind. Now, that's a tough job. So right then there's lots of delusion. So Lama Yeshe had the skill. I gave him permission, basically, to work on my mind. I gave him permission to show me my mind, and that's not comfortable. So that meant, for example, I had all this eagerness, my personality, and my background is publishing, okay? So I had all this eagerness and kind of enthusiasm to do publishing work. The moment I met the Lamas, I walked straight into the publishing room and started editing, and I just knew it would be my job, And then when we had the job to actually start Wisdom Publications in London, in England, when he moved us all there, this is my personal experience, I just assumed I'd be the director. Because I'm a bossy girl, I like to do things. Right? Now, my job is to work on my mind. So Lama Yeshe, seeing my mind and knowing what's most skillful for me, he said Robina will be the secretary. Well, I nearly fainted. I mean, I was speechless. And I'll never forget, I said to myself, poor Lama, he doesn't understand. The person he appointed as director was this peanut who knew nothing about publishing. And I had profession. I mean, I'm talking simple terms here. This doesn't sound like spiritual teachings. But I was into doing things. Bye-bye. So this is his way of learning to show me my mind. It took me years. I went mad. But I knew he was right. I knew he was trying to show me my mind. I had to learn to be humble, give up attachment, give up, do you understand what I'm saying? I would never have done that if I didn't have a teacher. I would have run off and done a very nice publishing company. I wouldn't have worked on my mind. So working on your mind is not just being some kind of nice abstract idea. It's intense. And the job of a Lama is to see your mind. And I went to Lama Zopa one time. He's also my Lama. And I had a question. And the nun was out telling Rinpoche in the room I could see him. Robina's out there, Rinpoche, like a question. He ignored. 4 times. Rinpoche, Robina's outside. He ignored. So she came out and shrugged. I went back to my room. That was his answer. He ignored me. Well, if you're feeling all attached and think your Lama should love you and stroke you, I would have been very offended. Lama Zopa was going blah, blah, blah. But that was the answer. Ignore me. So you get what you need to see your own mind. In a multitude of ways. The Lama are very hands-on if you have the personal Lama, Their job is to be ahead of you every second and see you coming and know your mind. But I mean, it's nothing new. When I studied Kung Fu, Mr. Lee was my Kung Fu teacher, he would scream at me. I was honoured. I didn't want to sue him for screaming at me. He could see my mind, and my Kung Fu was mostly, but I was honoured. I knew he could see I wanted his Kung Fu. I'd go 6 days a week. I mean, I'm always a fanatic. So he could see I wanted his Kung Fu, so he pushed me to my limit to help me get Kung Fu. But I had to trust Mr. Lee first. And I didn't know Kung Fu, so I had to suspend my own arrogance and decide Mr. Lee knew more Kung Fu than me, so shut up and listen. Do you understand what I'm saying? You need a teacher. It's practical. And if you like them, much better. Otherwise, you're dumping delusions, and that's defeating the purpose when it comes to Dharma practice. It's giving up delusions is the job. So to see them as pure is the most direct antidote to that. That means you better choose carefully. As Pabonka Rinpoche says, you choose your guru carefully. You're going to end up like them. So don't you give your heart to any old peanut. You make sure you choose a Lama who's worthy of your heart. And I say that really purposely. We need to choose the Lamas very carefully. Because it's a long-term relationship. Does it make sense? Yes. Good, darling. Let's go home then. Okay, so we sing a little prayer. I've got a couple of prayers in the book on your volume 2. The last page. We'll say it in English. Do you mind? These words in English, these 5 little prayers that Lama Zopa often recommends we say at the end. Okay, so what happened here? They're all messed up. Never mind. So these 5 on page 45 of volume 2. Okay. So as a result of the 3 times merits, that's past, present and future, of myself and others, you can read together if you like. May bodhicitta, from which the happiness of all sentient beings comes, be generated in the minds of self and other sentient beings without delay, even for 1 second. And that which has been generated, may it increase. As a result of the 3 times merits of myself and others, may emptiness be generated in the minds of self and other sentient beings without delay, even for 1 second. And that which has been generated, may it increase. Whatever dedication the victorious ones gone to bliss of the 3 times have admired as best, I shall also perfectly dedicate in the same way all these roots of virtue so that I may perform good works. That's another prayer here. They've all got squashed together. Because of the past, present, and future merit created by me and by the Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and sentient beings, may I, my family, students, and all sentient beings be able to actualize completely in this very lifetime Lama Tsongkhapa's path of unified sutra and tantra, which is pure like refined gold. May this pure teaching of Lama Tsongkhapa spread in all directions and flourish forever. And this is a prayer that Rinpoche always writes in a different way. Due to all the past, present, and future merits collected by me, Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all other sentient beings, which are totally non-existent from their own side, may the I, which is also totally non-existent from its own side, achieve Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment, which is also totally non-existent from its own side, and lead all sentient beings who are also totally non-existent from their own side to that enlightenment, which is also totally non-existent from its own side, by myself alone, which is also totally non-existent from its own side. Well, thank you very much, everybody. So remember, be delighted that as many thoughts as every one of us has had in the day, and even though we don't remember 99%, it doesn't matter. They've all gone in. It's like the way they say, one Lama said, it's like everything we hear and see in particular, it's like we're taking a photo of it and storing it in our mind. That's how come we even meet it next life. We forgot to talk about the death process. What happened to Fabrizio? Okay, we'll do it tomorrow.
To go to work.
Okay, we'll do it tomorrow. And this is why at the time of death it's so important. Because everything we see and hear especially puts an imprint in the mind. So then next life you see it. That's why it's so important what you put into your mind, you know. Nothing goes astray. So we think this whole day, all these thoughts have gone in, and we think, okay, may we nourish, and they've created seeds, sown seeds, if you like, programmed our mind. So we just think in general, may we nourish these seeds from this moment with our virtue, with our effort, with our practice, step by step, moment by moment, day by day, so that these seeds will ripen eventually as our enlightenment, no matter how long it takes, for our sake and the sake of all suffering sentient beings. Be happy, be delighted what we've done today. Be very content, you know, rejoice. Okie doke, thank you. See you tomorrow, some of you. I've got homework, okay, homework. 1, when you lie down to sleep, you think strongly, may I see my dreams as dreams. So you make a strong promise to yourself, meaning that while you're dreaming, you're conscious. We're trying to be conscious all the time, and we're mostly unconscious. So we start in the day by being conscious of what's happening. Well, even more marvelous, be conscious while you're dreaming. It's really helpful. And also they often use the analogy for emptiness, to see everything like a dream. So one of your little pieces of homework, make a strong decision before you go to sleep. I will see my dreams as dreams, meaning while you're dreaming, you notice you're dreaming. It's very helpful. And the second one is, and you're supposed to laugh here, if you wake up in the morning, ha ha ha, we all think we will because we're grasping at ourselves as permanent. But if you did some market research tomorrow morning in a 50-kilometre radius, knock on doors, and you ask, did anybody die here last night who didn't expect to? And you're going to find many yeses because karma ran out, you know. So that could be us. One day we will be dead. So if we wake up in the morning, as soon as you come back into consciousness, this is your second piece of homework, be blissed out that you're still alive. Imagine, think, my God, I can't believe it. My petrol tank of morality hasn't run out yet. How incredible, I'm still alive. And the reason we don't do that is because we assume, one of these big mistakes, we assume I'm permanent. That's one of our big lies in the mind. So those 2 bits of practice, if you can remember, even if you don't come back, try and do it. Thank you, everybody. And then make the decision, I'm going to make the most of today, come and do some teachings, blah, 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 so I can get enlightened, so I can help sentient beings. Think like that. Thank you. Thank you for the birthday wishes and the presents. Very kind.